welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. I interview leaders, experts and business professionals from around the world who are bringing leadership principles and know-how into the digitally driven 21st century workplace, with focus firmly on the how-to rather than the what. Each episode is in aid of a charity chosen by my guests, and since 2020, we've made donations to over 80 global and local causes. Today, the Rethink Leadership podcast welcomes Julian Reeve. Critically acclaimed for his work on the Broadway smash hit musical Hamilton, Julian is a keynote speaker and burnout specialist committed to disrupting society's attitude to work and achievement. He graduated from university in the UK before embarking on a highly successful career as a musician and entrepreneur, performing to millions around the world while founding 4 thriving businesses in the creative sector. This commitment, though, to his work led to a stress-induced heart attack when Julian was just 43 years old. That event itself inspired extensive research into the current trends for achievement and the exploration of alternatives, with his findings providing the foundations for his TEDx Talk on perfectionism and a children's book on the same subject. We've made a donation to Doctors Without Borders as a thank you to Julian for joining us, and proudly make this episode in aid of this incredible organisation. Julian, thanks very much for joining me. Please tell us about yourself, your extraordinary career, and something about yourself that not many people will know.
Great to be here, Jeremy. Thank you for having me. My extraordinary career, well, I suppose it starts in the UK, training as a musician to very musical, talented parents brought me up. Music was kind of an obvious route for me, and I kind of picked that as a profession probably as early as 14 or 15. I started doing professional shows. And I went on to work in music theatre around the world on numerous productions, many in the West End. But that's taken me all around the world. So I was very, very lucky to see a lot of very, very cool places. But alongside that, I've been an entrepreneur. I've now founded 4 successful companies in the creative sector. And kind of that sort of that kind of mix of music and performing and business has kind of, sort of allowed me to really enjoy my career, I suppose. And then I'm now speaking to you from Los Angeles. We moved over to America at the front of 2012. And there I again jumped into the business side of things, but also into music, and ended up becoming the music director for the Broadway show Hamilton on tour in the US. That was my last show in that business, as I'm sure we'll dig into. But yeah, that's the career. What's the thing about me that not many people know? Well, this pains me to say right now, I'm a huge Manchester United fan, and it's hard living in a country where football doesn't really mean football. I'm not going to lie to you. A lot of my guy friends are Brits, and they're Brits because we can actually talk football, because I kind of need that. Right now, my team really, let's not talk about it. I'm kind of slowly sort of following Wrexham because of, the brilliant story that, is partly driven by Ryan and Rob from LA over here. So I kind of get both sides of that, which is the interest. But yeah, football's a real passion.
Well, we've already found a few things in common, which is great, actually, because I'm from Manchester. So
okay, got it.
I grew up on a diet of music and football because it was illegal not to be, from the red side of Manchester as well. So
excellent, well done.
Yeah, but let's not talk about it right now, though. You're absolutely right. And I
yes.
much prefer to talk about Wrexham these days.
There you go, moving swiftly on, yes.
Oh, no, yeah. Well, you've talked about being a successful musician, musical director working on Hamilton, successful entrepreneur. Just digging into that sort of those 3 components of music, performance, and businesses you talked about. Straight off the bat, what can other leaders who are tuning in across any industry sector learn from your journey to inform how they evolve? We're in unpredictable, changing times. There are new opportunities. They're trying to transform their businesses in this digital era. What can you tell them?
Well, I think, one of the biggest things that I've really held on to consciously and subconsciously is resilience. And I think our ability to be resilient to change and to be agile to change is super important. I hadn't really realized until my transition out of performance, how governed we often are by the fixed mindset. The fixed mindset will keep us in a place where we're, making decisions largely driven within a box of which we live in because it's the most comfortable place to be. We're in full control of that very small area. And that limits our potential because it limits where we want to go. So we see opportunity, but we fear going out of our own boundary to seek that opportunity. And I think that's part of resilience, is actually shifting over from that kind of fixed element to the growth mindset. And I know, a lot of people speak about, the fixed and the growth and everything that we need to do. But I do really believe that it's the kind of fundamental foundation of everything that we need to be successful leaders moving forward.
Yeah, it's interesting that you point to resilience first of all as well, with all of the moving parts that leaders these days are dealing with. It's unprecedented, and I often use the phrase that one leader is just simply not enough these days. You've got to use the power of the many, be a bit more vulnerable, have more courage to ask for help from others.
Yes.
Otherwise, you could burn out. And I know that you've experienced some of this yourself. It hasn't always been plain sailing. And it's a big symptom of the workplace today. I do quite a lot of research into leadership, and the growth of feedback around anxieties, mental and physical health issues at the top just seem to be more commonplace than they ever were. It's almost been given permission to be talked about. So, in terms of, I know you can talk to this from personal experience.
Sure.
Maybe you could explain that a little bit more about your journey to success, how it, how it led to some really stressful situations, your self-learning and reinvention. What can those two
Yeah,
mean around for you?
sure. I mean, so I grew up in an environment that was results orientated. It was a very loving family environment, but it was, well, let's succeed in life, shall we? Let's achieve some cool things and be successful. And so, my whole journey was all about results, results, results. It was never about the journey to the result, ever. So, and because of when I came through, I'm nearly 50, so you can do the sums in terms of when I was growing up and the attitude societally about success and mental health and all that sort of stuff. It wasn't talked about. And so all of my success prior to my early 40s was driven by literally the resume. It was like the resume was, okay, well, I'm a success today. This is awesome. And it had very little association with me, how I felt, what was happening to me physically, what was happening to me mentally. I wasn't at all prepared for optimization in terms of performance. I didn't really have much of an eye on diet, on exercise, and any of that stuff because it was all about the work. Now, that led to a heart attack at the age of 43. Now, the irony of the heart attack was that I'd made many of the lifestyle changes that I needed to make after the heart attack about 5 years prior. So I wasn't overweight. I was a regular kind of, go to the gym, run 10K on the treadmill guy. I was fit. I was healthy. And I still had the heart attack because the damage had already been done. And what that lesson taught me was we have a huge responsibility, I think, as leaders to be the best that we can be every single day for ourselves and others. And the best that we can be every single day is actually what I now call perfect equilibrium. We have to find that sweet spot that allows us to perform at optimum levels, which isn't just about diet, exercise, routine, meditation, yoga, all the stuff. It's also about authenticity. It's also about self-awareness. It's also about self-compassion. There's a whole range of kind of subject matter that we need to keep eyes on now as leaders in order to move ourselves forward and our businesses forward and our employees forward too. So, as you say, it's been a real journey. And I suppose ultimately it's one that I'm very, very thankful for, partly because I'm still here. I can still, use this experience to help others, which I'm very passionate about doing. But also because I'm a strong believer that everything happens for a reason. And when people say to me, well, don't you miss Hamilton? Don't you miss being the music director of the biggest Broadway show on the planet? I go, no. And the reason why no is that I was meant to do Hamilton so that I could do the work that I do now. And the work that I do now is empowering people to avoid the heart attack and to help their employees do the same.
What strikes me is when you're talking there about, and I get that results focus. I'm slightly older than you, but that generation, that growing up with the generation of parents that we had, it was all about that. It was pride, results, what you're achieving, without necessarily the human being that you are, and you'd kind of driven that way.
Absolutely.
What struck me was when you said is that the damage was already done. So you changed your lifestyle almost 5 years previously, but the damage was already done. Can you explain that a little bit more? Because I'm sure this will resonate for some of those tuning in here and they'll want to get
Yeah.
hold of it.
Yeah. And I love that you've picked up on that. Thank you. The immediate realization after the heart attack was I had two paths that I needed to tread. I needed to tread the physical, which we've talked about, largely dealt with prior to that heart attack anyway. But I needed to understand the why. I needed to really understand, okay, well, if stress had led to the burnout and effectively this was a stress-related heart attack, what caused the stress? So you work backwards, you find the triggers and you move backwards. And eventually, through work with a psychologist, I recognized that my entire life had been driven by low self-esteem, which had been driven by perfectionism. So my mother was my very first piano teacher, and I had my very first piano lesson at the age of 4. Very quickly, and I didn't really understand this until, probably only a few years ago in its full capacity. But realistically, when I was in my kind of optimum growth years as a child, a mistake at the piano gave my mother an opportunity to love me less. Didn't know that I was making those decisions. It was a subconscious choice, but that was the drive for my perfectionism. So the whole point at the piano was to never make a mistake because of that reason. Now, what happened was that consistent perfectionism grew into consistent low self-esteem. I was never good enough because I wasn't doing Hamilton when I was 15, right? Those were the demands that I put on myself, which has been the story of my life. And the parallel of that journey is that it's fueled my success, but it's also damaged me. And part of perfect equilibrium is finding that balance.
Wow. What you're saying resonates with me through my career and something that I went through a few years ago as well, which is scaring me right now, I actually have to say,
Right.
because I recognize the words perfectionism, low self-esteem, always trying to do more, be better, and please others, actually, is the other thing that
Yep.
I would add to the list that you've given there. And I had made a change too, and I think that's very important. There are some who will listen who will equally, like me, that will resonate with, but they've perhaps not had the courage to stop. They've not had the courage to go and find help from others. Is there any advice that you might be able to give them to help them make that step forward?
Yeah, great question. Yes. I think, first of all, put yourself into what I call the dream state. And just imagine for a second what you might be able to achieve were you free of what you feel, right? And let's take self-esteem as a prime example. I think, the problem with self-esteem, well, there are many problems with self-esteem, but, you know, what I realized through my own journey is that we have layers. If we think of a rock that's broken open and we see all this strata, and we literally see history in front of us in terms of, wow, this rock is 100 million years old, and this is where it started, and this is where it went to. We're exactly the same as human beings. And what we start with is a childlike state that knows nothing other than endless hope and fun and joy. And what happens over a period of time is that we start to put these layers on top of ourselves. And most of the layers that we put on top are protection mechanisms that we add on as kids. Some of it's perfectionism, some of it's self-esteem, all of the stuff. And so it goes. Now, as we grow older, we outgrow those mechanisms, but we don't recognize that we've outgrown them. So a great place to start for anyone who is listening to this and connecting with this message is to literally sit down and imagine a normal working day or a normal working week and figure out all the things that affect you. So think about all of the negatives, all the things that screw with you, like comparison, for example, like perfectionism, like procrastination, like imposter syndrome, like anxiety, like stress, like loneliness. The list is endless. But try and be as succinct as possible in identifying what those things are. And that is the place to start, because then you have something tangible to attack, right? You have a list. Then from that point, and this is where it gets fun with stuff like perfectionism. If I hear one more time the phrase, but I value my perfectionism, I'm not changing. If I had $1 for every time a client has said that to me, we'd be having this conversation from Barbados in a very nice villa on the beach, right? People value perfectionism. I get it. But the problem is that it also causes tremendous upheaval. Dig into my TED Talk. I did a TED Talk on perfectionism, reframing perfectionism. I can't remember the rest of the title, my bad, but you'll find it, Julian Reeve TEDx. And within that, I talk about adaptive and maladaptive perfectionism. There's good perfectionism and bad perfectionism. Do the research on that, and that will start to help you move forward. Another good one for perfectionism, and I would arguably say it's tangible for everything that I just talked about, is pros and cons. If you value something, write down the pros, but also be open to the other side of what that is. So perfectionism, for example, the pros are, yes, obviously it helps you raise your game. Your standards are higher than most other people's, et cetera, et cetera. But there are considerable downsides. Then figure out whether the downsides are actually worth the good stuff, and also learn to release some of the things that you don't need. So, for example, if you're a perfectionist over an email that goes to a boss or goes to an employee, that's one thing. If you're a perfectionist about the inside of your fridge and it has to be, completely mapped out in terms of alphabetical order and cleanliness, all that stuff, then maybe not. Nobody else is going to see it. So why not take that off your list and actually use the time to commit to perfectionism in other ways that will benefit you more? I think that lastly, I just want to say to people that connect with the self-esteem message. I think one of the hardest things that we have to deal with is the feeling of loneliness in that space, because we always feel incredibly alone, and we're not, ever. And the common humanity element of low self-esteem through self-compassion is really important. Everybody feels what you feel. Everybody feels what I felt for decades in my career. The trick is, and the power in our journey is accepting that, giving yourself permission to doing something about it, and to being kind to yourself as you explore, right? That's all we're trying to do, is explore what else there is. And when we explore, we find new things that speak to the problem that we're exploring, which helps us move forward.
Such useful advice, Julian here, and it will talk to a lot more leaders than we think, and a lot of people that are out
Yep.
there. And I really understand the point that you said very early on through your discussion there around being free of what you feel from those negative emotions or stressors, whatever they are. And the point about perfectionism, as much as stress, there is good and bad stress, there is good and bad perfectionism. So, if
Yep.
I were to ask you with your vinyl collection, have you got that in some kind of order? What would you say?
I would say my vinyl collection, if I could turn my camera over right now, you would laugh heavily
Would I?
because my vinyl collection is literally everywhere. It's all over the floor. It's like there's almost no order to my vinyl collection right now. That's a good way to sum it up. I think, what's fascinating about that example is that I realized through my work with the psychologist that largely my own perfectionism was only associated with music. So I'm not really a perfectionist in other areas of my life. I mean, I kind of am, but nowhere near as badly as I was with music. And when you do the sums as to why, with everything that I spoke about earlier about my mum being, my piano teacher, makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm understanding your business and your the spirit of what you talk about, that perfect equilibrium is very meaningful too, as is the point you made at the end before around being kind to ourselves or kinder to ourselves. It's a good start point, that actually, for many. And there are therefore leaders out there who are treading a tightrope a little bit. Some are on top of this a little bit more, some not so
Mhm.
much, and are getting on top of it. So, from your experience, what can leaders to do in terms of building their knowledge and skills that might help them manage the stresses, but also at the same time manage and lead all of these moving parts that we've got in business successfully?
Mm. I mean, personally, it comes down to practice, routine, and awareness. I think, any leader would do very well to get on top of themselves on a daily basis through
Mm.
a routine, through a practice, whatever that needs to be. I'm not here to preach, well, yeah, you should be running 5 miles a day and you should be meditating, you should be whatever. It's not about that. It's about doing what works for you, but making the commitment to finding out what that is the first step. Because ultimately, a big part of perfect equilibrium is the realization that we will face stressors every day. We need to be as prepared as possible to face those stresses. But the only way that we do that successfully is to step up to the same plate in the same way, in the same state every day. We can't control what's coming at us, but we can control how we attack it and how we embrace it and how we address it. I think the next step above routine is self-awareness. Huge fan of self-awareness, and I learned so much from Dr. Tasha Eurich, who's now a friend of mine. I'm really happy to say she's a big addition to my life. She wrote a brilliant book called Insight, and my brain exploded. So this was probably just after I quit performing. I realized through Tasha's research that 95% of us think that we're self-aware. The actual number is between 12 and 15%. Now, it's little wonder that we burn out because we don't know that we're experiencing the stress that gets us to the burnout. We think we do, right? And so 3 questions I ask myself on a daily basis regularly. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I sensing? And, some leaders will think, well, yeah, okay. But, it's like, what am I thinking? Well, I'm thinking about this, thinking about that. The whole point of these questions is that it's exploration that takes you forward, because a question has to produce an answer, which then allows the capability and the option and the opportunity for further questioning, which takes you even further forward. That questioning presents answers that allows you to position yourself differently. What am I feeling? Stress. Why are you stressed? What's the stressor? Where's it come from? Dig deeper. Can you move away from that stressor? What else can you do to avoid that stressor? Is it social environment? Is it, is it a connection? Is it a relationship? Whatever it is, right? And I think the combination of those two things help position every leader to then take their best self into their working day, which not only benefits themselves as individuals, but allows them to lead from a place of strength and allows them to lead from a place of equilibrium. Because I think, some of the leaders that I've worked with, some of the issue is that they are themselves affected too much by what's going on around them. And as a result, they don't lead well, and their employees aren't necessarily being as productive or as all of the stuff as they could be. And so that's why this work is so important, so that, the leader can literally stand up, say, okay, I'm in my own perfect equilibrium now. Here's what I have. The extension of that is helping your employees find their own perfect equilibrium.
Yeah, there's a lot in there in these two initial points, though, finding the routine and being prepared, knowing that you're going to face challenges and stresses and opportunities, both positive and negative, and showing up for them in a way I really get. And that astonishes me as well, the self-awareness. I think many more do feel that they're self-aware and possibly not as, or choosing to ignore the
Yes,
reality of it as
absolutely.
well.
Yes.
I kind of had a third listening to you, which would be then, after you've got that in place, you lead well, lead yourself and lead others well as well. Going back just one step, you talked about what you ask yourself, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I sensing? Can I just ask a quick question? What's the difference in the way that you frame it between feeling and sensing?
Great question. Feeling is very emotional based, as in, am I stressed? Am I sad? Am I lonely? Right? Those are that's how I kind of differentiate feeling from sensing. Sensing to me is much more is here rather than here. And so it becomes what am I sensing right now? Am I sensing that the business is going in the wrong direction? Am I sensing that somebody has communicated a certain way in an email and they might not be okay? Am I sensing, it's the sensing element, I think, is really tunes into emotional intelligence and emotional awareness beyond emotion itself. And that's the kind of divider for me.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm not sure I've got it quite right, but the thinking, feeling, sensing, head, heart, gut.
Yes, I mean, the the sensing element could also include a degree of spirituality.
Yeah, yeah.
The sensing. I'll be honest, the sensing element has largely, for me, been driven out of meditation, because I think that when I get into my breath, really get into my breath, and that becomes the one kind of guiding light for a period of time, 10 minutes, half an hour, doesn't matter. Then we open ourselves, like our awareness of the wider, world, if you like, becomes very tuned in. And that's part of what I mean about the sensing versus the feeling.
Right. Well, they say that time flies when you're having fun, and time also flies when you're riveted, which I am. And I'd just like to wrap up this really important conversation for many of those tuning in, including myself. Talk about lessons you've learned, which you can pass on to others. So, those important lessons you've learned as an entrepreneur, as a musician, as a performance artist, as a business leader, that will resonate with leaders everywhere and that they can take in their kit bag moving forward.
Yeah, I think the lesson as an entrepreneur is let the silence speak. What I mean by that is we spend so much time running around trying to find the answers that we really lean into the fact that the answer is sometimes stop and listen, react, go again. I think one of my kind of own superpowers as an entrepreneur is knowing when things aren't going very well and when I need to move direction. But I'm good at that because it's part of my monthly, even weekly routine. So dial that in as a business leader, you'll do very well for yourself. I think from a leadership standpoint, remember that people follow the why, not the person telling them the why. A lot of the reason why I was the music director of Hamilton was nothing to do with my ability as a musician, and was everything to do with my ability as a leader. I'm a moral leader. I want to see the best in my teams, and I encourage a result that is driven from the heart, not from the mouth. And what I mean by that is, yes, we can tell people what to do. Yes, we can, order people from A to B. But if they're really on board with the values and with the moral driver of why they need to move from A to B, they'll move mountains for you. And from a retention standpoint, they'll stay with you forever. Lastly, I would just say, listen to what your employees need, by being as open as you can be for their needs. Provide safe space and tell them that it's safe space, that they can communicate with you in the way that you would like to communicate with your boss, even though you don't have one, right? And be that beacon of light, be that lighthouse for employees who desperately need that port that you hold. They desperately want to work for people who will provide that safe harbor where they can just feel safe and valued, rewarded, cared for, invested in, all of the things. And so much of that can simply come from how you doing? No, how you really doing, right? It sounds easy. I get it. It's not sometimes, but that's what I would be aiming for.
Wonderful, Julian. And I'm sure that many tuning in will want to continue this discussion with them. So how do they do that? And how do they find out more about Perfect Equilibrium?
Yeah, website, perfectequilibrium.co. There's everything on there from, individuals, how I work with people coaching wise, right the way through to consultancy in terms of burnout management and how we can kind of position your business to go from strength to strength as far as stress and burnout goes. Speaking wise, julianreeve.com. Yeah, you'll find me. I'm around.
Well, Julian Reeve, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Enjoyed that.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. Please like, comment, and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.